What if I told you that some of the most joyous, windows-down anthems in American music history are actually hiding terrible secrets? We crank the volume on our car stereos on a Friday afternoon. We sing along to the choruses at the top of our lungs with our friends. And we think we know exactly what these 1970s rock staples are all about. But behind the infectious guitar riffs and stadium-shaking drum beats hides a much darker reality. From unsettling tales of real-life spree killers to vicious psychological warfare played out in the recording studio, the golden era of rock was built on a foundation of pain, obsession, and tragedy that most fans completely missed. In fact, one of the decade's biggest hard rock hits was actually a furious response to a fabricated incest rumor designed by sleazy record executives. Today, we are tearing the mask off 10 classic rock songs you have been singing completely wrong. 10 Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. Here is what most people do not realize about Bruce Springsteen. By early 1974, he was practically broke. His first 2 albums had completely flopped, and the looming threat of being dropped by his record label hung over him like a dark cloud. Sitting on the edge of his bed in a rented cottage in Long Branch, New Jersey, he poured every ounce of that terror into a new composition. You have likely heard it played at sporting events or 4th of July barbecues celebrated as a wildly optimistic road trip anthem. But listen closer to the story being told. This is not a triumphant joyride. It is a desperate, panicked flight from a dead-end town that the narrator believes will literally kill him if he does not escape. The suffocating urgency of Springsteen's real life bled directly into the narrative. To capture that massive cinematic desperation, it took over 6 months just to record this single track. The production utilized up to 72 layers of audio to mimic Phil Spector's famous wall of sound technique. That density creates a feeling of being trapped, physically pushing the listener forward through the noise. It captured the raw claustrophobia of the American working class, proving that rock music could be deeply cinematic and profoundly tragic at the exact same time. Sometimes the song you write out of pure survival instinct is the one that secures your legacy forever. 9. Maggie May by Rod Stewart. There are songs you recognize in seconds, and this 1971 acoustic staple is one of them. Hitting number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, it sounds like a cheerful, upbeat folk rock sing-along. People sway to it, they smile when it comes on the radio. But here's the strange part. The narrative driving this breezy melody is a true story about a teenager being exploited by an older sex worker who ultimately steals his belongings. Rod Stewart based the track directly on his own personal experience at the 1961 Beulah Jazz Festival. He was just 16 years old at the time. He lost his virginity in a beer tent to an older woman who subsequently left him completely heartbroken and empty-handed. The upbeat arrangement serves as a clever disguise for a deeply vulnerable and gritty confession, one that audiences happily consumed without a second thought. Adding to the bizarre history of the track is the famous mandolin solo at the very end. That memorable closing section, which gives the track its distinctive flavor, was played by session musician Ray Jackson. He was paid a mere £15 flat fee for his contribution to rock history. The song demonstrated how a masterful acoustic arrangement could smuggle a highly controversial story right onto daytime radio. A warm melody can make us forgive almost any heartbreak. 8. Riders on the Storm by The Doors.
Riders on the storm.
Some songs become hits. Others become something else entirely. In 1971, The Doors released a track that peaked at number 14 on the Billboard charts, celebrated for its chill, atmospheric jazz rock vibe. The rain sound effects and the haunting Fender Rhodes electric piano give it a smooth, almost hypnotic quality that lulls the listener into a false sense of security. Yet beneath that calming exterior lies the chilling narrative of a real-life spree killer. Jim Morrison had developed a dark fascination with the grim story of Billy Cook. In 1950, Cook murdered an entire family while hitchhiking across the country. Morrison had previously toyed with writing a screenplay about a murderous hitchhiker, and he eventually brought this morbid concept into the band's rehearsal space. The group was casually playing a jazzy jam session, and Morrison began layering his terrifying verses over the smooth instrumentation. It was a stark contrast that worked brilliantly. And it worked almost too well, creating a deep, creeping sense of dread. Tragedies. This would be the very last song Jim Morrison ever recorded in his lifetime before his sudden death in Paris. It remains a prime example of psychedelic rock crossing over into true crime, firmly defining the darker edge of the 1970s counterculture. When the music sounds this beautiful, we rarely stop to ask who is sitting in the passenger seat. But that kind of lyrical deception wasn't just reserved for the dusty highways of the American West. 7. I Don't Like Mondays by the Boomtown Rats.
Today is hot today.
In 1979, an upbeat, piano-driven pop rock hit swept across international airwaves. It sounded like a quirky, relatable complaint about the start of the work week. Yet, the central theme was based entirely on the casual confession of a teenage school shooter. Frontman Bob Geldof wrote the track after reading a grim telex report in a radio station. A 16-year-old named Brenda Spencer had just opened fire on a San Diego elementary school. When a reporter managed to reach her by phone during the standoff and asked for her motive, her response was chillingly apathetic. She stated that she did not care for Mondays and that the violence simply livened up her day. Geldof turned that terrifyingly hollow justification into a massive pop arrangement. The track was heavily boycotted by American radio stations due to the fresh tragedy, severely stunted its chart performance in the United States, peaking only at number 73 on the Billboard Hot 1, despite massive international success. It forced the music industry to realize that pop music could instantly document and critique real-time national tragedies. Sometimes the brightest melodies are required to force us to look at our darkest cultural moments. 6. One Way or Another by Blondie. There is a specific kind of genius in taking your worst fear and weaponizing it. Disguised as a high-energy dance punk party anthem, this 1979 hit is a staple of sporting events and movie soundtracks. It feels aggressive, but in a fun, rebellious way. What's most interesting is that it is actually a terrifying first-person account of being relentlessly pursued. Debbie Harry was dealing with a deranged ex-boyfriend who would park his car outside her house, tracking her every movement. Instead of writing a traditional ballad about feeling victimized, she flipped the script entirely. She wrote the lyrics directly from the perspective of her stalker. By stepping into his shoes, she mentally stripped away his power over her and turned his obsessive behavior into a loud, mocking caricature. The band even went a step further in the studio. They intentionally incorporated a frantic, wailing, siren-like guitar effect into the outro to simulate the impending arrival of the police. It brilliantly utilized a catchy pop melody to help an artist process and overcome severe real-world trauma. Taking back your power sometimes means singing your nightmare out loud until it isn't scary anymore. 5. My Sharona by the Knack. Some rock history simply has not aged well. This number one smash hit from 1979 is widely remembered as the defining quirky new wave dance track. The heavy bass line and that famous stuttering vocal style, directly inspired by Roger Daltrey's delivery on The Who's early work, made it instantly memorable. But look closely at the story driving that manic energy. The lyrics detail a 25-year-old man's deeply unsettling, predatory obsession with a 17-year-old high school student. Lead singer Doug Feger walked into a clothing store and became instantly infatuated with a local girl named Sharona Alperen. He promptly broke up with his long-term girlfriend and penned the track as a completely unapologetic declaration of his lust. He even went so far as to put a photograph of her holding the single right on the record's sleeve. It was broadcast to millions of listeners who just wanted to dance to that driving beat. The track highlights the uncomfortable reality of 1970s rock culture, a time when deeply inappropriate age gaps were casually accepted as part of the rock and roll lifestyle. It serves as a strange time capsule of a boundary we used to openly ignore. Poor Brown Sugar by the Rolling Stones. Here is what most people do not realize about classic stadium anthems. The louder the crowd sings, the less they listen to the words. Released in 1971, this track went straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The massive, driving opening riff is played in open G tuning, a signature technique Keith Richards adopted from Delta blues players to give the Stones their defining decade sound. It makes you want to move the second you hear it, yet the actual narrative explicitly details the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade, physical torture, and horrific non-consensual encounters. Mick Jagger wrote the initial lyrics in about 45 minutes while sitting in a trailer in Australia, filming a movie. He casually blended the grim historical realities of slavery in New Orleans with heavy themes of heroin addiction. He created a lyrical absolute nightmare, and then the band masked it completely with an incredibly upbeat driving blues progression. Generations of fans have danced to a song describing unimaginable human suffering. It stands as the definitive example of how a brilliant guitar hook can completely blind the public to overwhelmingly dark subject matter. We hear the rhythm, and we completely forget to read the room. That same power to disguise ugly truths was being used just a few years later. But this time, the cruelty was strictly an inside job. 3. Go Your Own Way by Fleetwood Mac, often celebrated as an uplifting anthem of independence. This 1976 smash hit is actually a piece of vicious psychological warfare. It was designed to humiliate a bandmate on stage every single night. Lindsey Buckingham wrote the song about his crumbling romantic relationship with Stevie Nicks. He specifically penned a cruel verse that accused her of moving in with other men, aiming to publicly brand her as unfaithful to the world. Nicks despised the accusation. She begged him to remove the lines, but Buckingham flatly refused. He knew exactly what he was doing. And here is where it gets truly punishing. Because they were in the same band, he forced her to stand at the microphone and sing backup vocals on that very track at every single concert. The driving, unconventional drum, beat by Mick Fleetwood, was actually an attempt to mimic the acoustic street rhythms found in early Rolling Stones records. But that steady pulse only drove the knife in deeper for the band members living the nightmare. It proved that the greatest art often comes from pure spite, turning a bitter, petty dispute into one of the highest-selling albums in history. Sometimes, the most beautiful harmony is just two people who absolutely despise each other. 2. Hotel California by Eagles.
You can find it here.
Think about that for a second. We take songs of deep personal agony and play them at endless summer vacations and wedding receptions. In 1977, another sun-drenched California band released a track that went straight to #1 on the Billboard charts. It sounds like a warm breeze sweeping through a luxury desert resort. In reality, it is a nightmarish allegory for severe drug addiction and the total destruction of the American dream. Don Henley and Glenn Frey wrote the lyrics while navigating the excesses of Beverly Hills. They had begun to view the Los Angeles music industry as an inescapable trap built entirely on hedonism and cocaine. Everyone was smiling, but nobody was actually happy. The famous verse referencing stabbing with steel weaponry was a direct, cynical nod to the band Steely Dan, acknowledging the fierce rivalry and shared disillusionment between the two acts. To capture this glittering trap musically, the famous dueling guitar solo by Joe Walsh and Don Felder was entirely composed beforehand. It took 3 grueling days in the studio to perfectly record it layer by layer, building a beautiful cage of sound. It marked the definitive death of the 1960s hippie utopia. It acted as a musical eulogy for an era that had completely sold its soul to commercial excess. The brightest places usually cast the darkest shadows. 1. Barracuda by Heart. The music industry in the 1970s was notorious for chewing artists up and spitting them out. But every so often, the artists bit back, reaching number 11 on the charts in 1977. This thunderous hard rock triumph was written out of pure, unadulterated rage, and the target of that anger was the band's own record label. Ann and Nancy Wilson were completely disgusted when Mushroom Records took out a sleazy, full-page advertisement in an industry magazine. The ad heavily suggested that the two sisters were secretly in an incestuous romantic relationship, a lie completely fabricated just to sell more albums. The breaking point arrived backstage at a concert. A male promoter walked up to Anne and casually asked how her lover was doing, referring directly to her sister. She retreated to her hotel room in a blind fury. She realized that trying to argue with these executives would be completely useless. Instead of issuing a polite press statement, she penned a lyrical assault on the predatory, reptilian nature of the music business. The famous galloping guitar riff was heavily inspired by Nazareth's cover of an earlier folk track. The band utilized harmonic pinch squeals to make the electric guitar sound like a literal sea monster violently attacking its prey. It proved that female rockers could fight back against industry sexism with sheer, undeniable musical aggression. They transformed a moment of profound public humiliation into one of the most defiant riffs in hard rock history. Anger is a gift when you know exactly where to aim it. It is a strange paradox of human nature that our greatest traumas often produce our most celebrated art. These 10 tracks prove that a catchy melody acts as the ultimate Trojan horse, smuggles tales of heartbreak, true crime, and deep despair straight into the mainstream consciousness, hiding them right in plain sight. We keep singing along because the music demands it of us, even when the stories behind the chords should stop us dead in our tracks. Because some songs just become hits on a chart, but others define an entire cultural moment, leaving a scar that we mistake for a smile.